Hey everybody, it's Mr. E here with another therapy session for you. I've got my Mr. E bobblehead and my Mr. E coffee mug, which again, we can't hardly see the E on it, but anyway, it's there. So I'm sorry I'm a little bit late getting this video out. I know there's not really high demand for it or anything, but I am about a week behind or so due to taking vacation in March, and then I got behind on work. So what I want to do today is do sort of a second foundational topic. Last time in session one, we discussed the relationship between thinking, feelings, and behavior using what's called the cognitive triangle. Today, I want to add something to it that is a foundational topic, and at the end, I will actually explain how these two topics go together. My vision for this channel, again, I would like to have topics that relate to each other, where at the end, I can do sort of a diagram that shows all of the puzzle pieces being put together so that the picture is rather obvious what we're trying to do here. So this is the second session and therapy session, and what we're going to be talking about today is the relationship between freedom, responsibility, and consequences, and then how that actually relates to thinking, feelings, and behavior. So having said that, I will go ahead and share this screen, get the PowerPoint up. Also, speaking of PowerPoints, I don't know how to get the file on the Facebook page or under the video description on YouTube. So if anyone wants these PowerPoints, just email me at therapywithmre@yahoo.com. And of course, I'll just email you the PowerPoint. I mean, they're not trademarked or anything else. You can use them, especially if you're a therapist or a social worker. What you run a group for, alcohol and drug relapse prevention, anger management groups. I mean, you can use these for whatever you want to. So just email me and ask, and I certainly will. One point of order as well before I start the PowerPoint. No one asked for any topic. So I'm just going to kind of plow ahead with what I want to do. And if at any point you guys, again, in the comments, email me on the Facebook page, message me on Facebook. If you guys have any topics you want me to cover, go ahead. What I've discovered is it doesn't seem there's really that much interest in this, but I'm just doing it for free as a resource for people who need help. So, if you have ideas, let me know, okay? So having said that, let me go ahead and share the screen, and we will get started on this PowerPoint if I can get all this stuff out of the way. So let's go ahead and start it. So I like to start out with a quote. I think I've just decided this is the format I'm going to do. So this quote I think is perfect. This quote by George Bernard Shaw, it says, "Liberty means responsibility. That is why most men dread it." This is particularly true, especially of children and teenagers. They want freedom, but they don't want to work for it. They want what they think is freedom, but they don't want the responsibility inherent in freedom. And of course, sometimes people use liberty and freedom interchangeably. I try not to, but in this case, if you want the liberty to do something, there is responsibility built into it. You can't get away from that. So I agree with this quote 100%. I love it. If anyone has different thoughts or if you want to comment on it, please feel free to do so. So from last time, this is the pyramid of the various topics that I hope will lead us to what's called achievement of goals, which is really the whole point of therapy in general. And so last time, if you look at the bottom, these are the foundational topics. And so the one in green is the one we did last time. The two in red we haven't discussed yet. And the one in blue is what we're doing today, which again is freedom, responsibility, and consequences. So the first thing to understand about this is that a freedom is an action that you take, okay? So at any given point, you may have a decision to make about something. We always have decisions to make, even if you don't realize them. So for instance, in the morning when my alarm clock goes off, I can either choose to get up and go to work and do what I'm supposed to do, or I can choose to lay in the bed, be lazy, and sleep. So having said that, a freedom is an action that you want to do. It's something that you feel like doing. It's an urge, it's an impulse, it's just what you want to do in that moment. A responsibility, however, is an action that needs to be done or has to be done. Okay, it's something that you have to do or need to do. And of course, this is an action that we really don't want to do. So again, if Mr. E's alarm clock goes off and I decide to keep laying in bed, that's because I don't feel like getting up. It would be responsible to get up, but I don't want to, so I just lay around in the bed. Now, if I decide, however, to be responsible and I say, fine, I cut the alarm off, I get up, I shower, shave, whatever, the three S's. Then I'm being responsible. I go to work and I do what I have to. Now, another term that, even though it's lumped together on here, it's actually kind of separate, but it relates, is the concept of consequences. And of course, when I say that, I'm talking about both positive and negative consequences. So anytime you make a decision, which is pretty much all day, you're making decisions and taking actions, there will always be consequences, both good and bad. The question is, how do you balance it to where you get more positive than negative? And this is what I try to teach my clients, particularly the teenagers I work with who have behavioral issues. And so, to go back to the alarm clock example, if I decide to get up, do the three S's, get to work on time, do what I'm supposed to do, the negative consequence is I had to get up. It sucked. I didn't feel like it. I'm tired. But the positive is I have a good reputation at work. My boss is proud of me. They don't, they're not staring at me all the time, getting on to me because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to. They're not writing me up for being late. I make my money, and maybe eventually maybe I earn a raise because I'm responsible. So in the long term, I earn a lot of positives. But the negative is there is a little bit of short-term negative. I have to get up. I have to do what I have to do, and it sucks. Now, if I choose to be lazy, so to speak, if I choose the freedom path, I do what I want to, and I just cut that alarm off and keep sleeping. And then I wake up and then oh no, I'm supposed to be at work an hour ago. So now the positive is I got the short-term positive of laying around, sleeping, doing what I wanted to do. But of course, the negative is rather obvious. I may get written up. I may get fired. I don't make as much money that day. I look bad to my supervisor, whatever the case is. So a couple of points about trying to understand how freedom and responsibility relate to each other. What is the relationship? So freedom can only be obtained or maintained or kept through the use of responsibility. You cannot have freedom the way that, say a teenager thinks about it without being responsible. So for instance, when I was 15, I didn't pay all the bills. In fact, I didn't pay any bills. Now, once I was 16, I did pay for a cell phone back in the day of the dinosaur flip phones and the ones that before the flip phones. But the point I'm making is my father worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. He made the money and he paid the bills. I didn't know what the rent was. I had no idea what the utility bill was. I know now for sure, but I didn't know what it was then. The water bill, anything. No matter what it was, car insurance. He shielded me. He protected me. It was like there's a rainstorm. He had an umbrella and he put the umbrella over me while he got soaked. Well, once I turned 18, I stepped out from under that umbrella and the water was hitting me. So in this analogy, the umbrella is my parent shielding me from responsibility. The rain is the responsibility, And so not getting soaked by the rain as a kid in this analogy would be my freedom. So, but the problem is you can't have freedom without responsibility. So if you are unwilling to earn freedom, then you can't have it or hope to maintain it. And I would say further, that if you are someone who is unwilling to earn what you want, you don't deserve to have it. You're not man enough or woman enough to have it. And in fact, I would go a step further. If you're an individual who is an adult legally, let's say you're 30, but you just sit around, let someone else pay your bills, you don't do anything, and you're really not an adult. You're not independent. We'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, in a state of nature, take animals, for instance, freedom is really the same thing as responsibility. Okay. It may not seem like it, but it is. It's sort of like mirror images of each other. So you have one thing and it's staring back at itself, and you have to have 2 of these things. It's sort of like you have a wall. A wall is 2-sided. You can't have a one-sided wall. Well, that's sort of how being independent is. So if you go down a little further right here, point number 5 is that freedom plus responsibility, when you add these things together, you get the concept of independence. You cannot be independent without having some freedom to do what you want, but being responsible enough to obtain and maintain that freedom. So this is where, and we'll get to this in a minute, this is where most people confuse sometimes people think freedom is the same thing as independence, and it certainly isn't. Teenagers are the biggest offenders of this. They when they talk about freedom, they're thinking independence, but they're always missing one of the variables, which is responsibility. But we'll get to that in just a minute. So what most people call freedom is what they really mean is independence. That's what they're trying to do. Okay, so they're using 2 words that don't really mean the same thing. So some more points here as far as some concepts that I want you guys to understand. And, you know, if you're a social worker or a therapist, the reason, again, that I do these PowerPoints with all of this information is not so that I can read it, because I already understand all of this, but it's for you when you're dealing with, let's say, a 15-year-old with defiance. Uh, Maybe they're, you know, aggressive. They just don't listen to anything their mother says. They don't care. They're just out there doing whatever. And, you know, when the kid says, well, I don't understand why I should follow rules, I'm giving you, and I'm going to explain this more in a minute when we talk about teenagers, but, you know, I want you to be able to explain it fully. Okay. So, point number one here is you cannot have freedom to just do whatever you want, but not have any responsibility. That, in fact, makes you dependent on someone else. You don't have independence if someone else is taking care of your responsibilities. So, for instance, when I was 15 years old and my father paid all of my bills, I was dependent on him. I didn't have the money to do it. I couldn't do that. Was I free to do some things I wanted to do? Sure. I played a lot of, you know, PlayStation 2 at the time. You know, I went and hung out with friends, and I mean, of course, did some things I shouldn't have done. But the bottom, just like we all do. But the bottom line is this right here. I was not responsible enough, nor did I have the ability to be responsible enough to enjoy the freedom that my father enjoyed. Now, keep in mind, the freedom that he enjoyed were some of those little bones that life throws us after we turn 18 or 21 or whatever the law is, wherever you're at. You know, there's little bones that the government throws at you, little things life lets you have. But if you're an adult watching this, and you probably are, you know full well what I'm talking about. You know, most of the day you're working, you're cleaning, you're cooking, you're taking care of kids, you're going to work 8 hours, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. You're not really free to do anything. I mean, there may be things kids think are a freedom, like smoking cigarettes, drinking a beer at the end of the night or something. But, you know as full well as I do, you pay a high price in order to be able to smoke those cigarettes or, you know, whatever, drink a beer at the end of the night. I mean, you pay a really high price for that. And that's where the work and responsibility comes in. In fact, as an adult, it really is really imbalanced, because oftentimes you have more responsibility than you do than you have of freedom. So you can't have freedom without responsibility without being dependent on someone. However, you can also not just have 100% responsibility but zero freedom. That would be a slave. Now, having said that, really both point one and point two are really a form of slavery, because if you're dependent on someone, you're still a slave to a certain extent, just not to the same extent of, say, a chattel slavery, a chattel slave, which is what responsibility with no freedom would be. But if you think about it, point two here, the slave would be dependent on whoever, you know, the master is. I mean, this is rather obvious because they have no freedom, so they can't, you know, they can't do anything. Now, point number four, in order to be independent of other people, which again with teenagers, they don't want their parent telling them what to do. They want to do whatever quote, whatever the hell they want to do. Well, the problem is, in order to do that, they have to be willing to take on that responsibility. Good example of this would be teenage clients I've had in the past who have said, well, Mr. Eric, you know, why is it okay for my mom to smoke cigarettes, but I can't smoke cigarettes? Well, now, to some therapists, this would be a confusing question, but if you understand this lesson and let's say you've taught this lesson before to a kid, then you can say, well, do you remember when we were talking about freedom and responsibility? You know, and the kid goes, well, yeah, okay. And you go, all right, well, here's the answer. Do you pay for those cigarettes? And when the kid goes, no, mom pays for them. Okay, well, if you're not man enough and grown up enough to get a job, make money, and pay for those $6 a pack cigarettes, then you're not man enough or adult enough to smoke them, period. It's that simple. So even though this may sound bad, philosophically, if you have a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, he goes to work, he makes his money, he buys his own cigarettes. Legally, of course, it's illegal, because now you have to be 21 and before it was 18 in order to legally smoke. Would I want my child smoking? No, absolutely not. Would I want to get in trouble if they were smoking because they're 16 smoking? Absolutely not. But theoretically, if they're man enough or woman enough or adult enough to have a job, make money, pay for those cigarettes, okay, well, then you're man enough to smoke them, I guess, or woman enough to smoke them. I don't care. I mean, I do, but I don't, you know. So what I'm saying is, when you're dealing with a client, though, your job is not to tell them what to do. As a therapist, I'm not supposed to say, well, you better not be smoking those cigarettes. What I'm trying to do is get them to understand, if you want to do that, you better earn it. And if you haven't earned it, if mom's paying for your cigarettes, you really don't have a right to smoke them. Okay. Mom would, but you don't. And so I avoid the legal part of it with kids because kids don't care about the legal part. Okay. They're going to go to parties. They're going to smoke pot. They're going to drink, alcohol. They're going to smoke cigarettes. They're going to do it behind your back. They don't care if they're supposed to be 18 or 21. Let's be real. They don't care. So I try to engage them on this level. How can you get what you want? Well, if you're adult enough, responsible enough to earn that freedom, well, then you can enjoy that freedom. Again, number 5 here, look at nature again. Animals in the wild spend their entire lives doing what they have to survive. They have an instinct to survive, and then they spend their entire lives surviving. That's what they do. Survival is not fun. Survival is not partying and doing what you want. Human society, because, we have the ability to, we can solve problems. We have this frontal lobe that's larger than most other animals. And we have created a situation with ourselves where we shield ourselves from most of the problems with survival. But, if humans lived out in the wild like bears or raccoons or squirrels, well, I mean, what do you see raccoons, bears, and squirrels doing a good bit of the day? Well, they're out there gathering food, hunting food, trying to find water, trying to find shelter, building shelter. They're not laying around playing. Obviously, they couldn't play PlayStations anyway. But the point I'm making is they're not laying around doing whatever they want to, chilling, all day, just, whatever. Now, I'm not saying animals never relax. That's not the point I'm making. What I'm making is animals, if they just, like if you took a squirrel, and let's say during the spring and summer when it's collecting acorns and collecting things for winter, let's say that squirrel just lays around being lazy all the time, doesn't do anything, just maybe grabs one acorn, eats it, and just chills. Well, that squirrel's not going to survive winter. It's going to die because it's not being responsible enough to have the freedom to continue to do its thing. The thing is, the squirrel is independent. The bear is independent. It doesn't depend on anyone to do anything. It's kind of like if you take animals in a zoo that have been fed, born and raised in a zoo, they've been fed by humans since they were cubs or whatever. And then let's say you release it into the wild, the animal will probably just starve to death because it's just waiting for a handout, where it's dependent on the human. It's basically a slave to the human. So the animal, even though it has an instinct to survive, has no idea how to be responsible. So it just lays there and dies, basically. It doesn't know what to do. And so humans are largely the same way, even though we fool ourselves into thinking we're not. Number 6, when you're making a decision, you have 2 paths to choose from. You can either choose to take the freedom path, freedom of action, just do what you want to do, or you can choose to be responsible and do what you need or have to do. But either way, you're going to have positives and negatives no matter what you do. It's just that typically when you pick the freedom path, you end up with more negatives and less positives in the long run, but you immediately get what you want. Whereas with the responsibility path, it's pretty simple. You don't get what you want initially, but in the long run, you get far more positives and far less negatives. So having said that, this is a worksheet I developed while working with teenagers. And it's pretty simplified here, but at the top, to me, life is just a series of things that happen, events, like we learned on the triangle at the last session. And when things happen, you often have to make decisions. And so you have to make a decision between freedom, responsibility, and freedom and responsibility. But then both, you're going to have these consequences no matter what. So the question is, how do I maximize my positive consequences while minimizing my negatives so that I can actually be one day independent? Now, if you look at these lines right here, these lines are designed to be interactive within session. So I may ask the client a question, ask them to pick a percentage, and then we discuss the example. So if you're a therapist or a social worker, let me explain the middle part of this worksheet. So this is a 0 to 100%. This is a very simple representation of the amount of freedom someone has. In other words, the freedom to act and do what you want. Whereas the second line is sort of a representation of how much responsibility and then consequences come with the decision. And of course, a lot of times this depends on your age, which is what this second graph is. But before we get there, let me just put it to you this way. When you're born, I mean, when you're a baby, you have absolutely no freedom. You also have no responsibility. I mean, no one is going to expect a 1-month-old to sweep the floor, But also that 1 month old has no freedom. I mean, it can't walk. It can hardly even, I mean, it probably can't even turn over. It literally, the newborn baby can't do anything without, it's completely dependent on you. I mean, it's so dependent that it literally, if you don't do anything, it dies. I mean, that's how dependent it is. It can't do anything. It has no freedom. It also has zero responsibility. And I would assume zero consequences for its actions. I mean, what can it do? I mean, now there may be negatives, like if you have a baby laying next to something it shouldn't be laying next to and something falls on the baby and it gets hurt, that would be a negative consequence. But I can't think of any consequences for the actions of a baby, you know. Now, as that baby gets older, and just looking at the cursor here, as that baby turns into a toddler, maybe gets to be 5 or 6, the freedom level goes up a little bit as you maybe don't supervise the kid as much, because obviously you have to supervise a 1-year-old baby far more than a 10-year-old child, I would hope. So the freedom level goes up, but at the same time, equally, the responsibility level should also, and it does in fact, go up at the same level, and so do consequences, both positive and negative. So really, let's say you're at a 25% freedom level, you would also be at a 25% responsibility and consequence level. So for instance, let's take 3 ages. Let's take 5 years old, I don't know, 13 years old, and then I'm 35. Okay. And let's say all 3 of us, okay, the 5-year-old, the 13-year-old, and the 35-year-old do the exact same action. Okay. So let's say there's 2 5-year-olds, and one of the 5-year-olds hits the other one, assaults the other one. You have a 13-year-old, he fights with a 13-year-old, he assaults the other kid. I'm 35. Let's say I'm arguing with a 35-year-old man. I hit him, I assault him. Okay. So the level of freedom of the 5-year-old is maybe right here. We'll say 10% or something. I don't know. The 13-year-old might be about here. Let's say 25, 30%. My freedom level might be 50 to 60%, because I'm going to be more realistic than my teenage clients. Oftentimes they would think the adult is at like 100 or 90. But if you're an adult, you know that that's not the case. So let's just say the 5-year-old's at like 10%, 13-year-old's at like, 25%, and I'm at like 50 or 60%. Now the responsibility is going to be, and the consequences are going to be roughly the same. So for the 5-year-old, if their freedom level is 10%, their responsibility and consequences, both positive and negative, will also be about 10%. So they're not going to get a lot out of it by hitting the other 5-year-old. I mean, it might feel good, but they're not really getting much out of it. But at the same time, they're also not going to get in much trouble. Maybe they get their hand smacked, or they get put in the corner for 10 minutes, or they get, now, little Johnny, don't you hit him. But there's really not, realistically, there's almost nothing going on there. Sorry, guys, I can't find my cursor. Okay, so let's say then we take the 13-year-old here at about 25% freedom and responsibility. Okay, so when the 13-year-old does that, they may get suspended from school for a couple of days. They may get in trouble at home. They may get grounded for a day or two. They may get their cell phone taken away. They may or may not catch an assault charge. It depends on the seriousness of it. I mean, oftentimes in schools, you're just going to be suspended. Both people just be suspended. Normally, assault charges don't really go into it unless it's bad enough or somebody sues someone. By the time the person's 16 or 17, there may be, but at 13, probably not. The consequences are far worse than the 5-year-old, of course, because the reason for that is because the 13-year-old has a lot more freedom and responsibility and expectations on him than the 5-year-old. Now, I'm 35, so let's say my freedom is at a 60% level. Well, my responsibility and consequences, in theory, will be at 60. It may actually be higher. Well, let's just put it at 60. Well, that's a lot higher than the 25% for the 13-year-old, and a whole lot higher than the 10% for the 5-year-old. So if I assault someone, not only do I get an assault charge, and not only do I probably have to pay the medical bills for that person and myself if I get hurt, because I may very well, I might get my butt beat. I don't know. But then, of course, I'm going to jail. I'm going to court. I'm paying, if I get out early, I'm paying probation fees. I mean, I'm losing my job, losing my career, probably lose my kids. There's so many consequences. It's ridiculous. I mean, compared to the 13-year-old and the 5-year-old, even though it's the same action. So this is something kids don't understand. As you get older, yeah, your freedom increases, but so does your responsibility, the expectations on you that society imposes on you, but so do your consequences. So the good consequences go up, but so do the bad. In fact, the bad go up a lot. Now, this graph down here describes this more from an age standpoint. And keep in mind, originally when I did this, the age of 18 was generally when you could do most things except drink beer and alcohol. Well, now, of course, you can't smoke cigarettes till you're 21. So this is a little bit aged, I guess. So let's just pretend this says 21 instead of 18. But the point is, it's a graph that represents the amount of freedom, responsibility, and consequences that an individual has. So you have 0% really of all three of these things at birth. And as you get older, they sort of go up kind of, together. They don't really split. However, when you hit, let's just say 21 here, this line, the responsibility and consequence line, goes up rather sharply, whereas really your freedom line flat lines. It just kind of goes flat until you die. I mean, for instance, when you're 21 years old, you kind of have everything that the government allows you to do that you've aged into, going to strip clubs. Of course, having sex at 18, but whatever. This is kind of confusing, but you know what I mean. Um, Drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, signing contracts, taking on debt. I mean, whatever. By the time you're 18 and then 21, this is really all the freedom that you're getting. And so it doesn't matter if I'm 21, if I'm 50, if I'm 98. It doesn't matter how old I am. I mean, there's no, I've got a lot of elderly neighbors. I'm in a retirement community. They don't have any extra freedom than I have. I mean, it's the same. It's not like you gain as you get older. However, your responsibility and consequence line does often go up rather sharply depending on decisions. So if we were to put little hash marks here, 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 the thing is, it depends on the choices I make. So like if I choose to, I don't know, have a kid right here, get married, buy a house, well, my freedom is flatlined, but my responsibility and consequences have went very sharply up because of the decisions I made. Now, if I had not decided to have a kid, get married, or buy a house, my responsibility and consequence line might be kind of like what the cursor's doing right here. It might be kind of like down here. But because I chose to do all this stuff, now maybe it's like this. Well, see, the problem is because freedom and responsibility are mirrors of each other, my freedom actually starts to go down. And I'm gonna when we get toward the end of this PowerPoint, I will explain why this is. But and if you're dealing with teenagers, you'll also need to explain this. But basically, the more responsibility and consequences you have, the less time you have to enjoy freedom that you do have anyway. So for all practical purposes, you really don't have that freedom. And again, if you're an adult, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Now, let's take a look at freedom versus responsibility and the math of it, so to speak. So freedom is something that you want to do. It's an impulse. It's just instant gratification. I want to do it, so I will. Now, what this leads to then is typically more negative consequences in the long run, and you don't really get very many positives except in the very beginning when you take the action. Okay. Now, number four, you get a lot of short-term benefits from just acting on impulse and just doing what you want, but the long-term punishments and negatives are not good, and they last much longer than the benefits you got initially. A lot of times, this is the fair thing to do for yourself. In other words, if someone cusses me, it would be fair for me to cuss back. I mean, anybody would assume, well, if somebody cussed you, it's fair, you should be able to cuss back. Sure, in theory, but then like let's say that let's say I meet, I go into a school as a therapist working with children. Let's say I go into a school, and let's say there's a really, really rude receptionist, and she's being very rude to me. Yes, it would be fair for me to be rude back and tell her how it is and be whatever, be rude to her. But then I get kicked out of the school. She won't let me do what I need. Maybe my boss hears about it. I get written up. So even though that's the fair thing to do, and I get short-term benefits, it feels good to be, rude to her back. But the long-term benefit is it hurts me far more than her. I mean, it doesn't help me any. Point number six, when you increase your freedom artificially, what I mean by this is when you just take what you want, you do what you want, whether it's against the rules, the laws, it doesn't matter. You just want to do it, and you're going to do whatever you want to do, which is what oftentimes kids do, especially the younger they are. This is what they do because they have an impulse. They have that instinct to survive. They're selfish. And I explained this in session one. We have an instinct to survive. And so that makes us selfish. Okay. That makes us irrational. And part of that is just doing what we want to do. We feel like doing it. We have an impulse and we do it. The problem is that leads to less freedom, but more responsibility in the long run. And so if you look at the math down here, sometimes this cursor disappears, guys. I apologize. It's hard to know where it's at. But as you increase your freedom artificially by just doing what you want, you actually have a decrease in freedom that you can then add to an increase in responsibility and negative consequences. I'll explain this in just a minute with examples. The responsibility path, though, this is something you have to do or need to do. It's not an impulse. You delay gratification on this path. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to build up the positives that you're going to get eventually by suffering now, basically, is what it is. Instead of on the freedom path, you're just doing whatever you want and suffering later. Point number 3 under responsibility. It often leads to more positive consequences in the long run. And yeah, you're going to have some negatives initially, but they're not as high as the positives, and the positives continue longer than the negatives. With responsibility, you get a short-term punishment. You have to make a short-term payment, but you get the long-term benefits and freedom, which is the key to it. So especially when you're dealing with teenagers, you want to say, okay, what do you want? Let's help you get what you want. But in order to do that, you need to take the responsibility path. You're going to need to use responsibility to earn your freedom. You can't just do what you want. Teenagers often think adults do whatever we want to. And I'll explain that again later on. But of course, we don't if you're an adult. Most of our day is working. Okay. Number 5, responsibility is often unfair to you. It's not fair. If somebody cusses and screams at me and I just say, okay, and I just walk away from them, that's very unfair to me. I should, of course, be able to yell and cuss back, maybe hit them in the jaw. Of course, I should be able to do that. That's very unfair to me. But it would also lead to a lot of negative consequences if I do that. So by being responsible and walking away, I actually earn more in the long run, even though it's completely unfair to me. Point number 6. So increasing responsibility artificially, which what this means is instead of doing what you want, like on this side right here, over here, you're initiating responsibility. You do it on your own without being told to do it. Or if someone asks you to do something, you do it. Okay. Of course, the best way to do it is to initiate on your own without and just anticipate what someone wants and just do it before they ask you. But at the very least, if they ask you to do it, and like your boss asks you to do something and you do it, or your mom asks you to do something when you're a teenager and you do it, what that leads to then is less responsibility, because as you take care of that responsibility, it's now done. It's not there. So if you had 1 and you subtract 1, you have 0. So if I had dishes to do and I get them done, they're done. There's nothing else to do if we're just talking about washing dishes. So then let's say it takes me 5 minutes to wash dishes. Well, now I've got the rest of the day to do whatever I want. But let's say I'm a kid and my mom says, wash the dishes, please. And I say no. And whatever, let's just say I just sit there playing Call of Duty on the PlayStation for another hour. And then mom gets mad and takes my PlayStation the rest of the day. But then I have to wash dishes. Well, that doesn't really help me any. I got pleasure for an hour, but now I'm stuck, just sitting around for the rest of the day. And there's actually an example we'll get to in a minute of that. But the bottom line is the math on it is as you increase your responsibility artificially, then what happens is your freedom goes up and you have less responsibility because the responsibilities are taken care of, and you get more positive consequences in the long run. Now, freedom versus responsibility is sort of like two sides to the same coin. So if I have a quarter, which is represented here in the pictures, you have heads and tails. So let's say heads is freedom, tails is responsibility. You can't have a one-sided coin. I mean, even if you had the same image on both sides of the coin, it's still a two-sided coin. You can't have one side to it, it's impossible. I mean, in order to have, even if it's a 2D, looks like a 2D object, it's got to have two sides to it. So having said that, then ironically, the best way to increase your freedom, not independence, but your freedom, is to initiate responsibility or increase responsibility or just do what you're supposed to do. Because when you do that, then in the long run, you gain more freedom. It's sort of like when you save your money and then you have instead of having nothing in the bank, you're like, whoa, I've got $10,000 in the bank. Now I can go on vacation. That's sort of what we're talking about. So I've got 4 examples here I want to go through. The first example is, and I split it up between the freedom path and the responsibility path. So the first example is fighting or aggression. So let's say somebody calls you a name, you have this urge to hit them, so you just knock them out. You just punch them, right? So let's say for 5 or 10 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, whatever, you have that freedom. You have that high, that dopamine high. You punched them, it felt good. They shut their mouth. Everybody's like, oh, all the other kids around you are, acting stupid or whatever, whatever the case is. Well, the problem is, like in my case, let's say I got in a fight and I punched somebody and it felt good for like a minute or two. And then the cops get called on me. I get arrested, I get an assault charge, I do 3 months in jail, maybe. I get out, I'm on probation, I have to be on probation for 6 months, whatever. So the math is, keep in mind, of course, these numbers are made up. I mean, I can't know exactly how long, but let's say you have 1 minute of freedom. I just did what I want to do. I punched him. It felt good for a minute or two. So then that equals 6 months of responsibility and negative consequences because I'm in jail for 3 months. I get out. Let's say I'm on probation for 3 months. I have to take these stupid anger management classes. I'm having to pay all this money. It may be longer than 6 months. It may be a year for me to pay all that off. It might be 2 years. I don't know. But let's just say 6 months. So the trade-off is I gained 1 minute of freedom to do what I want, but I had to pay 6 months of responsibility and negatives. So I have far less freedom with the freedom path. I mean, ironically, if I pick the freedom path, I end up with a lot less freedom. On the responsibility path, however, someone calls me a name, something dirty and ugly, like, Mr. Eric, you ugly, you bald, whatever. And let's say that I just say, okay, thank you, and I walk away. Now, of course, that's very unfair to me, but let's say for like 10 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour, whatever the case is, let's say I'm really pissed off and I should have said this and I should have said that, but I didn't. I just said, okay, thank you, walked away. Now, even he may call me, you scared, bro, you scared, whatever he says. Okay, trying to shame me, trying to bait me or whatever. All right. So yeah, so let's even say for an hour, I'm pissed off, I'm upset, whatever. I go home, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, whatever I'm thinking. However, what I end up gaining here is 6 months of freedom that on this side, I'm not having to do this stuff. I didn't go to court. I didn't get an assault charge, no jail, no probation, no fees, no anger management classes. So let's just say minimum 6 months. So what we're looking at is, let's say for 5 minutes, it feels really good. Just hit this dude. Right. Well, but in this case, we're not hitting him. So in this case, let's say, even if we were to take this number up to an hour on the responsibility part of just how much it sucked to walk away from that. Well, what that equals then is I gained 6 months minimum of freedom because I didn't have to do this stuff. And I gain a lot of positive consequences from that in the long run because I'm not in jail. I'm not having to pay thousands of dollars. I'm not having to go to, anger management classes. So I end up with more freedom. So ironically, by being responsible, I gain more freedom and a lot more freedom, actually. Because over here, the freedom lasts for 1 minute, 5 minutes, 30 minutes. Over here, you get like 6 months of freedom. So, I mean, which one would you rather have? 30 minutes and even several days of freedom versus 180 days of freedom. Which one would you rather have? Well, the answer is obvious. You'd rather have this one. It's just that it sucks to have to do this part of it. The next one, work path. Now, this one's harder. The numbers are really, it's just completely arbitrarily made up numbers. There's no way to know what the numbers are. But the point here is, let's say you take the freedom path. You have a job and you just don't feel like doing it. You're just not going to do your job today. You're not going to do that report. You're not going to look at your emails. You're not even going to, answer your boss's phone call. Maybe me, I saw some clients and I'm not typing that note today. I'm not even worrying about it. I'm not going to see those clients. I'm just going to sit at home today. Okay, well, when I do that, then not only does my boss check up on me more and call me, hey, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing your job? The spotlight is on me. They're looking at what I'm not doing, right? And then I get written up. And if I keep doing it, I get fired. So let's say I gain 60 hours of freedom from being lazy over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, I'm just kind of not doing my job, doing whatever I want. But then let's say that then my responsibility goes up because not only during that time do I start getting looked at more, audited, people, calling me, emailing me, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing your job? I'm getting nagged at. But then, of course, when I get fired, my loss of freedom is almost infinite, just depending on how quickly I get a job or whatever. Because if you think about it, if I get fired and then let's just say I don't get a job, well, I run out of money. Maybe I end up being homeless at some point. Now I have nothing, and it's all because I just decided to take my freedom. Whereas on this side, excuse me, let's say that I go above and beyond. I do my job, and I even go above and beyond. I work really hard. My supervisor does not have to supervise me. She or he does not have to tell me what to do. I just do it on my own. Well, at this point, the spotlight is not on me because I'm doing my job. Now, other people may not be doing their job, and I can use that to my advantage because I don't want my supervisor staring at me all the time, telling me what to do. I want to be left alone, just like teenagers want to be left alone. Well, I want to be left alone. Just let me do my job, okay? So if other people are not doing their job, the spotlight is on them. not me. And if I'm going above and beyond, then I get praise. I have a good positive reputation. People ask me to do things, and when I do them and I'm helpful, I get praised for that. And then maybe I get a raise, maybe I get a promotion, which means more money. So again, the numbers on this one, I can't really do the numbers. I'm just made something up. But the amount of freedom I gain, even though it's unknown, it's going to be much larger eventually than my responsibility, even though it may not seem like it. In the long run, you really have to, and this is where teenagers, they can't do this. But as adults, we're talking about reputation. We're talking about your resume, what you can put on your resume, making it easier to get jobs at job interviews later because of your resume and your reputation in your field. There's a lot of benefits, promotions, raises that you wouldn't get otherwise, which means you save more money, you can go on more vacations, you get more personal time off that you can use for vacations. I mean, I don't know, I can't even list everything, but there's a lot of benefits you get from being responsible. Next example, teenagers and chores. Let's say you're 15, your mom says, please clean your room and do the dishes. You're like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm playing Call of Duty. I'm not going to do that. So let's say that altogether it would only take you like 30 minutes to do the dishes and clean your room, just quickly get it done. But you want to play your PlayStation. So for that 30 minutes, you're just like, screw it, I'm playing my PlayStation. Well, then mom comes in there and says, okay, turn it off. PlayStation's gone. She unplugs it. You're pissed off, but she says, you know what? You're grounded the rest of the day. And let's say you had about 5 hours until bedtime. So let's say it's, 4 p.m. Let's say you go to bed at 9 p.m. Okay, you're a teenager, you got to go to school the next day. So you decided to take that extra 30 minutes, right? So now it's 4:30. She takes it away, right? So here's the problem then. In order to gain that 30 minutes of playing Call of Duty on your PlayStation 4, okay, what happened now is you basically what you're really doing is you still have the 30 minutes of responsibility that you're going to, I mean, because now you got in trouble. She tells you, you better get in there and do that right now or I'm going to take your cell phone away. So then you go in there and you start doing the dishes and you clean your room. Let's say it takes you the same 30 minutes it would have taken you. So not only do you still have, in exchange for the 30 minutes of freedom that you just took because you felt like playing Call of Duty and didn't want to listen to mom, you still have to do the 30 minutes worth of responsibility. I mean, it didn't go away, but now you have the negative consequence of 5 hours of the loss of freedom. So now you have 5 hours that you cannot play your PlayStation. Whereas if you would have just done the 30-minute chores, then you would have had, and it shows it over here, you would have had 4.5 hours of being able to play your PlayStation. So in other words, on this side of the equation, you're 15, your mom says, please clean your room and do the dishes. So you're like, okay, mom, no problem, I'll do it. So you spend 30 minutes doing these chores and then you go back to playing PlayStation. Well, here's the thing. Your mom is happy. You have a good reputation with your mom because you actually got up and did what she asked you to do. You didn't give her any trouble. She's happy. She's thinking positively about that. This has a lot of benefits later down the road. Maybe you want something like to go to your friend's house, and because you did what you're supposed to do, maybe she says, sure, go ahead. Whereas over here on the freedom path, she goes, no. I mean, you won't even do stuff I ask you to do. You're not going to your friend's house. However, coming back over here, the math, let's say you spend 30 minutes being responsible, doing your chores when mom asks you to. Well, now you gain 4.5 hours to play your PlayStation, whereas over here you lost 5 hours of PlayStation time. So over here you earn it, plus the positive consequences of positive reputation, being able to earn things over the weekend maybe. Now maybe you'll be able to go hang out with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Whereas if you had not done the dishes, she'd say no, Over here, you have less overall responsibility because not only are the dishes done now, but your room's clean. And if you keep it that way, instead of what every teenager does, which is to trash it again, if you're smart enough to just keep it that way, now you don't have to clean your room again tomorrow. So now tomorrow, let's say you have to do dishes for 10 minutes. Okay, so now you spend 10 minutes and you gain 4 hours and 50 minutes of PlayStation time. So this is common sense. You're earning so much more than what you're actually paying. So in other words, in this scenario, well, with all the scenarios, the responsibility is the payment that you're paying out in order to earn this. And so you're earning a lot more than you're paying out. Last one, stealing example, the freedom path. So let's say there's a video game that Mr. E wants. But I don't have the money for it. I don't have that $50. So I have this urge, I have this impulse. I'm just going to take it. Okay, I'm going to take my freedom. I'm going to take that video game because I want it. Just like a 2-year-old grabbing a cookie. Okay, so I decide it's mine. So I just go and I steal that video game. I don't know how, but let's just say I do. Let's say that I somehow get away for like a day But, the cops are called, they figure it out, they look at the recording on the video, they identify me, they do backtracking, they look at my driver's license, they figure out where I live, cops show up with a warrant. And let's say for one day I was playing that video game. I was enjoying it, I was having my freedom, I didn't have to pay for it. But let's say for one day I do that and then the cops show up. Okay, well, now the problem is, let's say I go to jail, for a year. I can't even go to Walmart for the next year because Walmart banned me. I have to pay restitution to Walmart, which is probably more than what I stole, paying court fees. And let's say I'm on probation for 6 months after that. And then, of course, probation fees, okay, which anybody who's ever been in jail and been on probation, that's not easy to do, okay? So in exchange for one day of freedom to do whatever I want to do, I end up earning the responsibility of 1.5 years plus the negative consequences, everything I just listed up here. So in other words, I add to that then a loss of 1.5 years of freedom. In other words, the 1.5 years that I'm in jail, can't go to Walmart, on probation, there's all of these things I could have been doing during that time. Like, for instance, let's say that I go to jail April 1st. And let's say I had planned on going to the bar with my friends and drinking some beer and watching the game on April 3rd, on Friday or something, right? Well, now I'm in jail. So I enjoyed that one day with the video game, but now all of that fun, even just that one day, I've lost it now. I can't go to the bar with my friends and watch the game. But more to the point, during that 1 year, 1.5 years, who knows how many times I might go out with friends or see my girlfriend or, just whatever I want to do. Now I can't do any of those things because I'm sitting in jail. Over here, let's say there's a video game and I don't have the $50. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to save money up over the next month. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to save my money. I'm going to get that $50 and then I'm going to buy it at the end of the month. So let's say I delay my gratification. Instead of just taking what I want and just, instant gratification, which is what this freedom path is, I decide to delay it. Okay. So after a month, I buy that video game. And then let's say for the next 2 years, I play that game. So in other words, in exchange for 30 days of responsibility, for being patient, for building my money, saving my money for 30 days, that's the payment. But in exchange, I get 2 years of freedom to play that game. And it may be 3 years, 4 years, I don't know, however long I keep the game in the system. But I gain these positive consequences of having what I want. And then on top of it, on April 3rd, when I want to go see my friends at the bar, I do. And all of the things I would have done that I could have done, but didn't over here because I'm sitting in jail. Well, over here, I'm not sitting in jail. So all of those hundreds and maybe even thousands of things I would do during that year, just on a daily basis, even just sitting on my front porch. I mean, sleeping in one day. I mean, all of those things that you can't do in jail, I could do right here during this year, 2 years, 3 years, that I'm not in trouble because I decided to pay for the video game. So the point that I'm making with these 4 examples is, if you want to gain freedom, you chase responsibility. If you want to gain responsibility, chase freedom. It's the opposite. Now, teenagers and freedom. Let me take a little drink here because my voice is getting a little rough and dry, and this is an important topic. So the way that you apply this is with behavioral management. So like, for instance, with me, I do a lot of behavioral management with kids. And so the bottom line is, kids always rebel. They will always want their freedom. They will always try to get their freedom. I call this the I can do whatever I want to do delusion. Right around the age of 13 or so, they start to say, well, when I turn 18, I'll do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to move the hell out of this house, and I don't have to listen to you anymore. Every teenager does this. I did it. You did it. I mean, I don't care who's watching. Everybody's done it. Everybody did it at some point. The point is, though, the reason for this is that kids confuse. They mistake the word freedom for independence. They think they're talking about independence. In other words, I'm going to move out, do whatever I want to do. But what they're really thinking is they're confusing it with freedom, because what they want to do is they want to party and smoke pot, and smoke cigarettes and drink liquor and have sex with their girlfriend and boyfriends, but they don't want to pay bills. They don't want to have to pay the mortgage or pay rent or electricity or car cost or buy food or pay for the food, cook the food, clean the house. They don't want to do any of that crap that we have to do as adults. They just want to do whatever they want. But they think that's independence. But again, you have to add responsibility to freedom. Again, you have a missing variable in their brain. So that's why it's a delusion. In addition to the fact that if you're an adult, you know we are not free. We work and are far more responsible than any freedom we have. Point number two, I would say most defiance and behavioral issues in teens really comes from this urge to take their freedom, to do what they want to do, but they don't want to pay the price for it. They don't want to be responsible. And of course, as I said, this is completely impossible because when they try to do that, they're just making themselves more dependent on their parent, not less dependent. So, and they're also creating a situation where the parent does not want to give them these freedoms that they want, like seeing their boyfriend, seeing their girlfriend, hanging with friends, having a cell phone. Because if you're not doing things that the parent wants you to do, you're not earning it. And that's where your negative consequences and loss of freedom is coming from. But see, teenagers don't understand this, so they continue to beat their head against the wall. They continue to do something that doesn't work. As they say, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results, that's the definition of crazy. Well, kids will sit there and say, no, I'm not cleaning my room. Get their PlayStation taken away. They get it back the next day, clean your room. No, get PlayStation taken away. And they can't figure out why this keeps happening. If they just clean the room and keep it clean, not only would they never get threatened, they'd never get their PlayStation taken away. And then because the room's clean, they don't have to clean the room. They gain more time and freedom to do what they want. Anyway, so life always balances freedom and responsibility out. Okay, period. I don't care who you are. If you're just doing what you want, but you have no responsibility, life is going to smack you in the ass real quick. Okay, it's going to balance it out. It's just the older you are, up to the point of 18 and 21 legally, because that's when you're an adult. Up to that point, I mean, it just as you get to older, between birth and that age, it gets worse and worse as far as the balancing out. That's what kids don't understand. So ironically, they lose a lot of freedom by chasing their freedom versus doing what they need to do, which is chasing responsibility, initiating responsibility. So, years ago when I first worked with children, I had a kid ask me, well, Mr. Eric, why should I have to pay attention to rules? Why should I have to listen to rules? It's just stupid. Why do I have to do these things? And I didn't have an answer at that time. This was like 2012, 13. I didn't have an answer. And so I got to thinking about it, and I came up with this idea, this whole PowerPoint, the worksheet I showed you earlier on the PowerPoint. I came up with that in my head while driving home one day. And I got to thinking, well, of course, kids don't care about the typical reasons. Like if you have a therapist and the therapist says, well, you should follow rules because the rules keep you safe. Well, first of all, that's a lie. Rules don't always keep you safe. In fact, sometimes some rules are stupid. I mean, let's just be honest. Some laws are stupid. Sometimes laws and rules can be immoral. They're not even moral. Some of them make no sense. I mean, there's so many laws on the books that, I mean, everybody breaks the law at some point. There's so many of them, whether it's locally or federally. But the point I'm making is kids don't care about that anyway. They don't care about it keeps me safe. They don't care. It's not something they're even thinking about. So the best way to engage a kid is to try to get them to understand, how do you get what you want without getting in trouble, without getting the things taken away that you want? How do you gain what you want? And this is where I came up with this. And so if you can explain to a kid, if you chase your responsibility and get those things done, you will earn maximum freedom. That's what we're trying to do, is maximize freedom and minimize responsibility. The best way to minimize responsibility is to initiate it and do it on your own and just get it done. Because once you get it done, it's done. And then you can do what you want. That's what I'm doing right now with this video. I've had a very busy morning. I'm trying to get everything done, and then I'm going to relax, versus if I just relaxed and then I'm stressed out trying to get things done, or dishes pile up, trash piles up, whatever. Point number 6 here, because I've kind of ran through some of these. Responsible behavior is rational. In other words, like I said during session 1, rational thinking is based on a fact. It helps you solve a problem, whatever the problem is in the event on that triangle that I showed you. A rational thought is something that is based on fact. And so it leads to rational behavior. And rational behavior is something that actually helps you solve that problem. It makes sense. It helps you solve whatever problem or reach whatever goal you're trying to reach. So responsible behavior typically is rational because it helps you do that. So if I have a problem, like from session 1, when I said, okay, the car, let's say the battery goes out in my car, and I go to start my car, and I can either, be rational or irrational. So let's say I decide to be rational and I decide to call my boss. Hey, boss, I'm going to be late. I've got to replace my battery, but I'll be in as quick as I can. Then I call my friend. Hey, Jimmy, can you take me to the AutoZone to get a battery? And then let's say I go to the AutoZone. I get the battery. I put the battery in and I go to work. All of these behaviors not only are rational because they make sense. They solve my problem. My car has a battery. It starts and I went to work and made money. But also it's responsible. All of these behaviors are responsible. Whereas if I choose the irrational path and I'm like, I hate this stupid car, I can't believe this piece of crap did this to me. And I kick the car door, I go in, I throw a lamp, I get drunk, and I just say, screw it, I'm not even going to work today. Okay, well, when I do that, every one of these behaviors are irrational. They make absolutely no sense. The car still won't start. I still didn't go to work. In fact, I may have gotten fired. So not only is it irrational, it's irresponsible. It's not responsible behavior. It's just doing what I want, taking my freedom. I feel like kicking that car. I feel like throwing that lamp. I feel like getting drunk and just not going to work. So when I do that, the behavior is not responsible. It makes absolutely no sense. It does not help me. And in the long run, I end up with more negative consequences and more responsibility because of loss of income, or I have to do more work at work if I don't get fired. I still have to replace the battery. So it's not like the responsibility goes away if I avoid it. Whereas if I just do it and get it done and I'm rational and responsible, then it's done. It takes like an hour. You get a battery put in, you go to work, you don't get in trouble, you still make some money. There you go. Number 7, one thing parents make a mistake of doing, that if you're a social worker or a therapist and you're doing parenting, point number 7 is very important, okay, for anyone. You cannot protect a teenager or a child, no matter how young they are, but you cannot protect particularly a teenager from the natural consequences of their actions. Now, what I mean by that is, if I punch a wall and my hand breaks, that's a natural consequence. If I kick a coffee table and stub my toe and it hurts, that's a natural consequence of my behavior. If I throw something and it breaks, that's a natural consequence of my behavior. When people try to shield, especially children and teens, from the natural consequences of what they chose to do, you actually do the opposite of what you're doing. In fact, you're teaching them that it's okay to do those things, and they will continue to do those things because they didn't experience the negatives of their action. So you cannot do that. If the child chooses to just take their freedom, do what they want to do, and not be responsible, well, whatever happens, you have to let them take the fall for it. You cannot bail them out, just like the government bails out banks all the time. That's why the banks keep doing what they're doing. So you can't do that. Okay, you have to, because they become dependent. And once they try to move out at 18, they think the real world is just going to save them from all of their actions. And this is not going to happen. If you're an adult now, you know, if you make a bad decision, you get the natural consequences, and no one is putting that umbrella over your head, like I just said earlier about the umbrella. So number 8, you can only have freedom that you are willing to earn and maintain. Okay, that's it, the period. And so that's what being an adult is. Now, before we get to number 9, there is one thing I kind of forgot to put on this PowerPoint, and that's the idea of, I want to give you an example of how you can teach this to a teenager. Let's say you are an individual who you just wake up one day on an island. Okay, you wake up on this deserted island out in the middle of the Pacific. No laws, no rules, no cops, nobody tell you what to do. You just wake up. And you can do whatever you want to. There's literally, it's just palm trees, animals, water, beach. That's it. It's just an island. There's nobody except you on it. Now, if you ask a kid, well, what's the first thing you would do? A lot of kids say, man, I'd light up a blunt, And sometimes you can change the scenario and say, let's just say you just woke up one day on this island with a bag of weed and some rolling papers and a PlayStation, and somehow there was electricity and the thing worked. There's a thing of Jack Daniels sitting there. What's the first thing you would do? And of course, typically kids 12 to like 15, sometimes even 16, sometimes all the way up to 18, they will say, well, man, I'd be getting drunk, bro. Man, I'd be rolling a blunt, bro. I'd be getting high, dog. You know what I'm saying? Okay, here's the thing. If you're an adult, you know where I'm going with this. If you just appear on an island and you have nothing, you have nothing except the clothes on your back, okay? You have no food, you have no water, no laws, no rules, no cops. You can do whatever the hell you want to, but you have nothing except, let's say, a bottle of Jack Daniels and some weed or whatever, or even nothing. The bottom line is this is the freedom and responsibility path. The question is, what's the first thing you do? Well, the first thing Mr. E does, Mr. E is going to go look for some water, first of all, because within about a day, with that sun hitting me, I'm going to be dead if I don't find some fresh water. Okay. Second thing is, I've got to build some tools. I've got to build some weapons. I've got to be able to hunt. I've got to be able to fish. Maybe I'm going to eat snails until then. I don't know, but I've got to find food and water, first of all. Secondly, I need to build shelter. I don't know when a storm's coming. I don't know how bad it's going to be. There may be animals on the island that might kill me. I need to have some kind of tools. I mean, I need to be able to start a fire. It may get cold in the evening on the island. Maybe I don't want to freeze. Maybe I need a fire. I don't know. But in other words, what I'm getting at with this analogy, when you address this with a kid, they're almost always going to pick the freedom path. Well, I'm just going to lay around on the beach and sleep and do what I want to do. Okay, well then probably within a day you're dead because you're not looking for fresh water, you're not trying to eat, you're not doing anything. So the ultimate negative consequence is death for any living thing. So you're just taking your freedom, but very quickly the responsibility, which is massive. If you're just on an island by yourself with nothing and no one else, most of your day is going to be surviving, just like an animal. Like I said earlier, out in the woods, if you have a bear, a raccoon, whatever, that's your entire day. That's it, surviving. And so you either do it or you don't. And if you don't, you're dead. If you do, you live. But most of your day is working your butt off, period. It's not laying around doing whatever. Now, after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, let's say you built a shelter, you've got some food built up, you're good at hunting, you have good tools, you got some furs, you know how to make a fire, you've got kindling, you've got everything you need. Now maybe you can lay around on the hammock you made by yourself, by the way, because there's no store to buy a hammock. So you lay down and you chill. Maybe you drink that Jack Daniels now. Maybe you roll yourself a blunt now. I don't know. If you just popped up with one on the island. But the point is, you can't do that till you take care of your responsibility. Point number 9. Teenagers often confuse what's called technical and practical freedom. So let's take a look at this real quick. So I split it up here. I'm not going to say everything, but pretty much a freedom based on a technicality, a rule, or a law is what I'm calling technical freedom. So at 21, when Mr. E turned 21, technically, by the law, he could drink liquor and beer. Great. So this is a freedom that adults often have that's just given to us by the law. It's not something that, it's just something we hit a certain age and all of a sudden the technicality hits and now you can drink beer, now you can smoke cigarettes, sign contracts, whatever. Now, because it's a technicality, and usually due to age, you can't always do it. You can't always practice it. I mean, just because Mr. E can drink liquor doesn't mean I can sit around doing that 24/7 and not go to work. It's not practical. I can't do that. And so most of the time, like 95, 98% of the time, if you look at my total life, I'm not drinking liquor. So let's say 1% of the time, a 0.5% of the time, I'm drinking liquor. Okay, well, then the other 99.5% of the time, I'm not drinking liquor. So even though I have the freedom to do it, I can't do it. So an example would be like an adult works 8 hours a day. He can technically stay home and get drunk and whatever and skip work, but it's not practical because then he won't make money, gets fired, ends up being homeless, whatever. A practical freedom is something you can. It's an action that you can actually do. You can actually practice it. You can. If I have that freedom, I have time to do it. And so with kids, this is the kind of freedom that kids and teens often have because maybe they have the freedom to play on their cell phone or to play Call of Duty on the PlayStation, or maybe they have the freedom to hang out with friends or to, ride their four-wheeler. Okay, that's wonderful. They have this practical freedom. So even though technically they don't have the freedom Mr. Eric has, Mr. E has, they can't drink beer, legally have sex. They can't sign contracts, take on debt, buy a house, smoke cigarettes. But the freedoms that they do have, Call of Duty, their cell phone, hanging out with friends, swimming at the lake, riding the four-wheeler, they can actually do those things. They have the time to practice those freedoms. I don't because I'm working all day. So an example of that would be a kid that's out of school for summer. They have all day to do whatever they want to if they're young enough, and they do, And so they can practice it. They have the freedom to do it, but their mom's going to work 8 hours a day. So even though the mom has all these freedoms that the kids are worried about, like drinking beer, having sex, and smoking cigarettes, the mom can't do that all day because she's at work 8 hours a day. She's being responsible. Whereas the kid can play the PlayStation all day. That's their freedom and they can practice it. So we're getting toward the end here. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this video to be this long. But if we take Mr. E's modified cognitive triangle, the thinking triangle from last time, all I did at the bottom was add this lesson. So behavior is going to either be responsible and rational and help you solve the problem that's in the event, or it's going to primarily be a freedom, something you want to do, which is typically often irrational because a lot of times it's based off irrational thinking and impulses, and it tends to not help you solve the problem or reach a goal up here or deal with a trigger. So consequence, of course, no matter which one you pick, whether it's you're responsible or you're free or you pick your freedom path, you're going to get consequences, positive and negative. It's just that with responsibility, you get more positives in the long run and less negatives. With the freedom path, you tend to get more negatives in the long run and less positives. And typically those positives are short term. The last thing I wanted to say before we get off of here is this is a little quote from a song called Blinded by the Light by Manfred Mann. And all jokes about douches aside, which the song doesn't say that, but if you listen to the song, of course, there's always that joke about douches. But my favorite quote is toward the end of the song. It says, "Mama always told me not to look into the eye of the sun, but Mama, that's where the fun is." Now, what I did was I put in here for this lesson, when it says, "Mama always told me not to look into the eye of the sun," this is a metaphor because, of course, if you look into the sun, you could go blind if you look in the sun, so you're not supposed to do that. But in this song, what this is a metaphor for responsibility. In other words, Mama's telling you what to do and what not to do. You know, you need to go to work, pay your bills, don't go to that club, don't do that cocaine, don't get caught up with certain people. But then the kid says, "But Mama, that's where all the fun is. That's where the freedom is. That's what I want to do. I want to do the cocaine and have sex and do what I want to do." So Mama's telling him, don't be doing that. And he's saying, "But Mama, that's what I want to do." And so, of course, the consequence then is you look at the sun and you're blinded by it. That's why it's called Blinded by the Light. And so I just wanted to throw this out there as sort of an end cap to this. So guys, as always, if you have any suggestions, any topics you want, any comments on this topic, anything, comment on the YouTube, under the YouTube channel, comment on my Facebook page, message me. I mean, on there, I don't care, whatever you want to do. Hit the like button, subscribe. I know this isn't really high demand information, but I want to try to help people. And this topic may seem kind of strange, but I promise you, this is the foundation. This really is the foundational topic. If you can understand this, you understand life. And if you understand that, then this lesson applies to anger management, substance abuse and relapse prevention, behavioral management with children. This can apply to literally anything. So anyway, guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Please, again, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave some comments, whatever you want to do. But anyway, have a good day, guys. Bye.